Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace the front lower control arms on the 2011 Buick Lacrosse. This is the same process on the Lacrosse from years 2010 to 2016, and likewise on the Cadillac XTS, the Chevy Malibu, and Impala. This is the exact same process on those vehicles as well. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I really do like to use these GM genuine parts when we can get them. That's going to be no different today. We have a couple of these control arms that are the factory GM part, made in Canada, not made in China like some of those others that you see in the aftermarket. In addition, all the bolts and nuts for this job are all torque to yield, meaning these must all be replaced because once these were installed the first time, these bolts stretch and you cannot reuse them. So my goal here today will not only show you how to replace these control arms, I'll give you all the part numbers for all these bolts and nuts, and I'll also give you the correct torque specs to make sure you're putting this together the right way. After you get the vehicle jacked up and supported with some jack stands underneath, we have one underneath there. Now we can go ahead and remove this tire, and this is just going to be a 22 mil or a 7/8. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to remove these 3 push pins, and to do that you can just take a flathead screwdriver if you don't have the special tool and just get in here, gently pry that out, then get a needle nose or something else to get on this top part, and then that should pull right out. So just do that on all 3 of those. Next we need to remove this plastic cover. To do that you're just going to have 2 15 mil bolts. Next we need to remove this cover. To do that you're just going to have some 8 mil bolts. You have one here, and one on the end. Then we're going to remove the wheel sensor, and this is just going to be a 10 mil. And be careful pulling on that because sometimes those get stuck. Just wiggle it back and forth like this by the part here, then pull it out. Then we'll go ahead and release the clips that are holding all 3 of these in. All you need to do is just get under here with a flathead screwdriver and just gently pry that out. Now we're ready to remove the ball joint. To do this, you're just going to have a 15 mil bolt here. Just put a wrench on the back side, then go ahead and remove this. To get this removed, there's a number of different tools, and I have a whole set of these OTC ball joint removers, and it comes with a bunch of control arm movers, etc. there that they do come in handy to remove these things. With that said, if you don't want to spend the extra money on that, you can just knock this off because we are replacing that. So we'll go ahead and put a little pressure in here to kind of pry that open a little bit, then we'll be able to knock our control arm ball joint out of this knuckle. One thing I'll add here real quick, the majority of the time you do this, every once in a while you get lucky and these come right out. A lot of times they don't. If you can't get it pulled out of here, just come back in here and gently pry a little bit more to relieve that pressure off of there. And then just keep applying pressure here and eventually you'll be able to get it out. The next thing we need to do here is remove this 18 mil bolt holding our front control arm. So just take your 18 mil wrench on the back and go ahead and remove this. And do the same thing on this bushing here as well. So again, put your 18 mil up there and go ahead and remove these. Then the last thing on the removal, just get a screwdriver or pry bar. You're going to have to pry it out because it is going to be wedged in there, but eventually you'll get it loose. Alright, so now you can see we got our old one removed, and if you're curious on what I used there, and this is what I guess I would call the Cadillac of pry bars. This is just a gear wrench version where you can increase and lower the size on the length, and you can also adjust that. So if you're in the market for a pry bar, this thing has really came in handy over the years. You can adjust this many different ways, and they make all kinds of different sizes. So if you're interested in that, check out the link. I'll put a link in the description to that. Now we're ready to install our new control arm over there, and as I mentioned there before, this is the factory GM part, so there should be no surprises here. It's going to literally line up and function exactly like that old one removed. In addition, all these bolts, like I mentioned there before, are torque to yield. You must replace all of these, and I'll put links in the description to all these part numbers so you can make sure you get the correct bolts and nuts for this job. So then the last thing we'll do here, we'll just double check that our sizes and our lengths of our bolts and everything looks good, and they should line up exactly like the old ones. And if everything checks out here, then we'll go ahead and start the installation process. All right, so we'll go ahead and slide this in there. You get these lined up. Sometimes you get lucky and they'll move around like this one is. Other times you can take a screwdriver and come in the center here and gently pry it one way or the other, depending on where you need it to go, so you can get your holes lined up so you can slide your bolt in there. Then when you get it lined up, just go ahead and insert your bolt. And then we'll just loosely tighten this for now. Then we'll do the same thing on the back here. Then again, we'll loosely tighten these. Next, we'll insert our ball joint up into the knuckle, and again, you're going to fight with this a little bit to get it into the right spot, but eventually it will slide in there. Alright, so once you get it lined up there, again, we'll take our screwdriver and we'll open up this a little bit, and then we'll gently knock our ball joint inside the knuckle. Alright, so once you got that lined up, then we'll take our new bolt and nut and we'll slide it in here. One point to pay attention to is that ball joint must be past that lip, and I'll give you a picture of what I'm talking about. Just make sure that lip's in there, because this is a pinch bolt that's just going to go in there and to hold that in there. So if you're not in there all the way, you won't have enough clearance to get this in there because there's a cutout in that ball joint. So make sure you got it in there all the way, and once you do, we'll go ahead and loosely tighten this as well. Alright, so now that we have everything loosely tightened here, We're now going to jack up our control arm with our jack here to get our control arm at ride height before we torque these down. This is important to do because depending on how you torque this, when the control arm's sagging down, it could potentially have adverse effects on you driving down the road. So it's typically best practice to do this before you torque any of these bolts down. So we got our jack positioned here, and we'll just gently start jacking up the control arm. Alright, so now that we have our control arm positioned where we want it, it doesn't have to be perfect as long as we have it jacked up a little bit here. We'll start with our ball joint over here, and this is going to be torqued to 37 foot-pounds plus an additional 30 degrees. Alright, so there's our 37, then we'll do an additional 30 degrees. So next we'll tighten up this bolt here, and this one's going to be 74 foot-pounds plus 75 degrees. Alright, so there was the 74. So then finally we'll do the additional 75 degrees. So moving on to the back too, we're going to also tighten these to 74 foot-pounds and an additional 75 degrees. So there was the 74, then we'll just do our additional 75 degrees. So now that we got our control arm all torqued to spec, we'll go ahead and remove our jack. Then we'll go ahead and install this plastic shield back up in here. And then just tighten those three 8mm bolts back down. And you don't have to get them very tight, just gently snug them up. Then take our next cover, insert it in that hole there, and then tighten both of these 15mm bolts down as well. And again, just gently tighten these. Alright, so the next thing we'll do here is we'll just put our push pins back in here. If you did break these when you removed them, it's not a big deal. You can get these replacement kits online, and I'll put some links in the description. These are relatively cheap, and you'll always have these in the future. So if you did break them, just get some new ones. But if they're in the good shape, typically you can reuse these. So just set your push pin in there, push it in there first time, and you'll hear the second click, and do the same thing on this one and up top there as well. So then the last thing we need to do is reconnect our wheel speed sensor here. So just first put these clips back in. Then come over here on the other side, then reinstall our wheel speed sensor. Then go ahead and snug this up, and don't get this too tight because that is just plastic. You risk breaking it if you do. Alright, so then the last thing, just double check everything's tight and everything looks good, then repeat that same process on the other side. Now, one thing you need to pay attention to is after you're done with this, it is recommended to go get an alignment, especially if you use an aftermarket control arm, because some of those are going to be built differently with weight, etc. there, and it could throw off the balance. With that said, if you use the GM one, it's probably not going to be as much, but I still recommend to get alignment if you can, because the last thing you want to do is get this done and it throws off the balance one way or the other there. So I do recommend, after you get your job done, go ahead and get it alignment, then you've completed your job here. So hopefully this helped you out. If it did, please give me a thumbs up. If you're interested in more content like this, please hit that subscribe. But again, I hope this helped you out, and thanks for watching.